Uh, I need Carson to help me out with something. Come here, dude. I wish I had. I wish I had an illustration, but you got to see something that we did. And listen, your pastor. I'm really not a moron. I really have common sense. I promise. But some things I look back at what I did, and I'm like, what was I thinking? Do you ever have those moments? Please tell me I'm not the only one. Where you have those moments. Thank you, Brother Danny. Me and you. Where you're like, there was another way. There was really some common sense. I promise I have it, but at times, I don't know what happens. Be it a situation, be it an open door, an invitation. Yeah, we can try that. I don't know what I was thinking at 14 years old playing chase on a roof. I had two friends whose houses were really close together. They were two-story homes, and they had attached garages. And there were places where it was very safe to run up and down, but there were places where there was like 40-degree angles. And we were jumping from one house to another, grabbing on the window sills, coming in and out of windows, playing chase, in and out of, I don't know what I was thinking. How am I alive? Because God obviously wasn't finished with me yet. I've been trying to get in God's way for my life for years. And so the other day, me and Carson get home. He gets off the bus here with Pastor Joey's kids, and we get in the car, we go home, and we're getting out of the car. It's the afternoon. He's still, I don't know. I don't think he had football practice this day. It was probably Wednesday, and in the backyard were a few toys. I said, Carson, go pick up your toys, and he went and picked up his toys and left Layla's right there next to him. Said, go get everything. So he, it was a wiffle ball, a bat, like a little figurine, and then a big bouncy ball that Layla has with princesses on it, and Carson's carrying it's got the little, it's the thing you sit on, you kind of bounce, and it's got the handle on it, and he's kind of swinging it, and he says, Dad, here, and he hands me the bat. He says, hey, try to hit this out of my hand. Okay, and so, okay, I know where you're going, and so, but it's as bad or worse than you think it was. So here's Carson with this, basketball and then some size thing, and he's swinging as hard as he can, and I have a plastic wiffle ball bat in my hand. So you can visualize this. Carson, act like you're swinging something, and I have this wiffle ball, boom, and we're hitting. It's a plastic bat on a rubber ball, boom, and we're going at this thing, boom, and I mean, I hit it out of his hand a few times, and I think if I miss it, he gets a point. He came up with this system, and if I hit it out, I got a point. And somehow, all of a sudden, it was tied, and it was the national championship. All right, Dad, national championship. And so he goes for all he's worth to sling it, and I'm like, okay, boom, and it happened. I nailed him right on the arm, and it was one of those. It takes like a minute and a half for them to breathe in. And he's like, and he was just crying with no sound. Can you do that for us? Yeah, but you remember, don't you? Did it hurt? How bad? It was really bad. The first words out of my mouth, don't tell your mother. Okay? It happens. Okay? And so, in that moment, I hurt my son. But there's a difference between having a moment of stupidity and hurting your kids or biting your kid's head off. There's a difference between doing something that causes them pain and doing something that causes destruction in their lives. And so tonight, I told you this morning, we're going to deal about how to forgive family. Give Carson a hand for being a good sport and putting up with a daddy that just turns off the lights sometimes. I'll tell you what. I was like, man, if your mother would have seen us, man, she'd have threw me out of the house. What are you doing attacking my son with a bat? Oh, it happens all the time. And that was a momentary lapse of judgment. But do other injuries and pains start with a momentary lapse of judgment? Mine was just stupidity. But what about an alcohol-induced momentary lapse of judgment? What about an anger-induced momentary lapse of judgment? What about a frustrating week? What about financial pressures that cause a parent to redirect stress? And maybe you've been the victim of something like that. and you still carry the weight. And when you're hurt by your family, it gets hard. Well, here's two things that happen. Your face gets hard, number one, and then it gets hard to face people. That's a little play on words there. You can tell when somebody's been hurt. You probably live next door or down the street from somebody that has an unusually rigid demeanor. You know if you have those you may be one of those kind of people. I remember the guy in my neighborhood that scared me to death. Well, I remember him most about the nose hair that stuck about a half inch out of his nose. And his name was Mr. Bick, like the pen, Mr. Bick, back in Macon, Georgia. Scared me to death. Scared me to death. And like when we would come by, riding our bikes or playing ball, all the kids in the neighborhood, get out of my yard. You know, Carl Fredricksen, have you ever seen the movie Up? The little short square dude? That's him. That was Mr. Bick. Get off of my mailbox. You know, I'll never sell my house. You know, it was just, you know. But here's the deal, man. I went selling one like a fundraiser. Actually, against my better judgment, and with everybody staying back at the edge of the street, I approached slowly up the sidewalk. You knock on the door. He had a wife. We had never seen her. We lived there for 2 years before I saw this woman, Mrs. Bick. And they invited me in, and I was never heard from. No, I'm just kidding. They invited me in, and man, they had pictures of grandkids and a game room in their house, a trampoline in the backyard. But we would never get close enough to see. And they bought all kinds of stuff, candles and, you know, little frames. It was one of those little crafts, little catalogs, and they bought like $30, $40 worth of stuff. And I made my quote in one stop. It was amazing. And, but I mean, there was a lot more to them, but there was frustration. And we judged him by the cover that we saw, and he had been hurt. And it turns out that my parents knew him a little bit more, that he had several children that would not talk to him, that would have nothing to do with him. And he had a house that was ready for grandkids that never got to see any grandkids. And some of you may be there. And it happens with hurt emotions, hurt feelings, harsh words, disagreements that start with a momentary lapse of judgment, something said that should have never been said. There's some things that it's okay to think, but that should never, ever come out. Abraham Lincoln, when he was frustrated with any of his military leaders during the Civil War, he would sit down and write them a very detailed letter, blessing them out about everything that they were doing wrong, and then he would throw it in the fireplace. He would get it out, and then he would destroy it. And then he could go and he could communicate with grace and not say or do anything that caused offense. When you get hurt, you begin to expect favors without gratitude. You begin to spend a lot of time with people who feel like you. Misery loves company. Can you say amen? And because of your attitude, you end up with only a very few friends who you're very afraid to lose. Bitterness makes you extra sensitive, extra touchy, and ready to fly off the handle at any moment. That was Mr. Bick. That was Mr. Carl Fredricksen. Maybe it's you, maybe it's not. I don't know that it's any of you. You all come and seem to fit in at church fairly effectively, but what are you carrying around at home? What does the real you look like under the skin in your true pulp of who you are? The worst thing about not forgiving is that you get totally turned on to yourself. This is something that, here's my flashlight. Here's what happens when your life becomes all about you, you can't see anybody else. When I'm focused on me, is there anybody still here? This is a really bright flashlight, by the way. Okay. The Lord showed me that one day on accident. Because this car that we have, if you open the door, the lights automatically come on. And there is a button in there that can stop that. But I was trying to get some bugs and stuff off the windshield or off the light, and it was taking forever for them to go off, and I couldn't see anything. And the Lord said, you know what? When you're focused on yourself, you can't see what's going on around you. You can't see anything in anybody else's life. When you get hurt and you get bitter, you get focused on you, and you're impervious and oblivious to the other things that are going on around you in other people's lives. That's what happens when you get hurt. You stop caring. You stop giving up. You start giving up on others, and you begin to give up on yourself. sadly, in those moments, overdosing and jumping off of bridges begins to look rather appealing. And I don't mean to say that in a haphazard way. I've read a lot of stuff leading up to this month. And when people get hurt, they begin to consider things that they would never consider. When they're hurt, it's like the end of the world and there's no hope, especially when it is when there's a gaping hole in your family between you and your closest relatives, especially between parents and kids. When there is a lack of communication, when the interference there, it almost makes ending it all seem very appealing. Think about it. And maybe you're there, maybe you're not. I'm sure you at least know somebody that is in that area of life. What we're talking about here is being hurt by someone that's close and not being able to forgive. And it forms bitterness, and bitterness is deadly. Bitterness sends more people to death than any other sin. Bitterness does. People that consider suicide or even attempt suicide but fail. You ask 100 people why they would do something like that, and 100 will tell you, well, because of what somebody did to me. You weren't there. You don't know. Momentary lapses of judgment. Not just a wiffle ball and a bad game, but in a moment of anger or a prolonged season of anger, taking it out on people that you should never take it out on. Bitterness gets worse and worse and takes you deeper and deeper. And when you trust someone and that trust is betrayed, where you're rejected, disgraced, or hurt in some other kind of unspeakable way, no matter how long ago, today that moment is still as ingrained, it still burns as hot today as it did when it happened. Am I lying? If it's you and you're still holding that, you know that's true. If it's been done to you, it can still overwhelm you today. Those things that were done to me that I didn't really enjoy in life, that I didn't ask for, oh yeah, they're still there. And I am convinced that I have forgiven. I'm convinced that I can go and love on those people, but I haven't forgotten it. And then that's the struggle for me. I wish we had a delete button somewhere. And you know why people drink and do drugs? Because that's their momentary delete button. They try to drown the bitterness with numbness, with pain. And maybe you've been there. Maybe you live with somebody that's there. Maybe you have a very close friend or family member that's going through that kind of life. That kind of hurt makes you want to hit back, doesn't it? It does. That kind of hurt makes you want to hit back when you're painfully wounded in ways that are almost unexplainable. Bitter people leave a trail of wrecked lives behind them. Hurt people do what? Hurt people hurt people. Hurt people get very good at hurting people. And the more you hurt, the better you get at hurting. This is a sensitive area. I don't expect a whole lot of amens. I know that. I knew that going in. But I pray that we're going in a direction that's going to allow you to release some things in just a few moments. This is not a typical sermon. This is more of a conversation. And I would absolutely be open to comments or any feedback. And even if you want to share what God's done in your life. If a young man gets hurt, he then becomes specialized in the area of hurting girls that fall for him. As a youth pastor, we knew many teenagers that had been hurt by family or in past relationships, whether it be physical, whether it be sexual, whether it be emotional, whether it just be verbal. Abuse is abuse. And hitting your son with a bat is abuse, but momentarily, and please don't call defects. I know it was dumb, I'll admit it. It was just a plastic bat. Abuse is abuse. And we knew of several girls that once they became hurt one too many times, they just stopped feeling altogether. In order to close off the pain, they just allowed themselves to become numb. But when you're numb to pain and attacks on an emotional level, you become numb to the Holy Spirit. Because God communicates on a spiritual and emotional level. And when you can stop feeling hurt, you also lose the ability to feel happiness. And so that then they become numb and they no longer experience joy. And we saw that play out in so many lives. And she can tell you, we drove around in late hours of the night hunting down kids whose parents had no idea where they were. Only to get a call at like 12:30 or 1 a.m. Oh, they're home. Everything's fine. And so I show up. I'm like, what's going on? Oh, I was just mad at Mom, and I was taking it down on her. And you try to reach out on these kids. You try to break through that surface, and you just can't because they're just numb. And it's a game. Life becomes a game rather than a compilation of meaningful relationships. It's just about seeing what they can get out of people without ever truly opening up. See, bitterness makes you blind to the needs of others. This young lady I'm talking about, she became skilled at the art of being tough, and she became as hard as a rock. She became calloused to tenderness and to care and to the love of Jesus. She lost all of her friends except those who were also drowned in bitterness. Because misery loves company. And listen, when you're miserable, healthy, happy people don't really want to be around you. When there's a vice that has you gripped, when there's something that is just eating you alive and you're festering with it, you put off this putrid emotional odor that a lot of people don't want to be around. And if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. Not only do you drive people away, you don't really want to be around a whole lot of people that are happy either, do you? Because their joy messes with you. Bitterness is just this decaying disease that gets inside of you and begins to eat away at you. You begin to put up a wall around you that no one can get through. You become very private, hiding your dreams, hiding your hopes, your wishes. You begin to give short answers, just textbook answers to things. Hey, what do you want to be? I don't know. I'm still thinking about it. You deflect everything rather than letting anybody really penetrate. And Solomon wrote about that in Proverbs 14, verse 10. He said that every heart knows its own bitterness, and no one else can share its joy. Some versions, instead of no one else, it says that and no stranger can share in its joy. But that word stranger, or the grouping of words no one else, means to be estranged, to be divided. That hurt and wounded person, they bury their feelings, they bury their emotions, they separate themselves from society. Now, do they still coexist? Oh yeah, they coexist, and they can sell joy, and they can sell satisfaction, and they can sell going and doing the job. They coexist and even make people think they're friends. But in a moment, they'll fly off a handle. And somebody that you thought you knew is completely different. And that happened with us. Girls and young guys and youth, even adults and friends that we had that we think we had formed relationships with in one little thing, or we would challenge people in a certain way, and it was like a switch had been flipped in their lives. How volatile they became, and how backstabbing and accusing, and someone that could play the church game and even put up their hands during worship. When you challenge them or call them out on something, immediately, snake, immediately striking at you, spreading rumors. Students attacking me with their friends, spreading rumors about parents, all kind of stuff. Kids that I had spent time with, poured into their lives, trying to break through. But they had put up a wall. They'd been hurt so many times they could no longer feel. And I wasn't going to be the one that got through. Bitterness allows you to start blaming everything on everyone else. You ask people why they drop out of school, why they go to live on the street, why they medicate with drugs, alcohol, perversion. It's bitterness. They're trying to keep quiet a deep-seated hurt. It's absolutely appropriate to pity someone living on the street. It's absolutely appropriate to reach out to somebody if the Lord so moves upon your heart. I tend to not want to go put cash in somebody's hand, but I'll drive somebody to McDonald's and I'll put food in their hand. If they're at a gas station, I'll go in and bring out some, several Gatorades and whatever, and bless them. I'm just a little weary to put cash in somebody's hand because I'm afraid they're going to use it to quiet their pain with stuff that I would never buy with my money. I used to go down to Rescue Atlanta, an inner city ministry in downtown Atlanta, and we would do worship and we would minister and do street witnessing. And I came across this guy that was in a dirty but fairly nice little get-up, dress slacks and a jacket and a little Oxford, but it was dirty. You could tell he'd been wearing it. The guy was a medical doctor that chose to live on the street. He owned 3 houses. Both of his kids lived in one each, and then his wife, he was still married, lived in his other house. Very successful, but he had been wounded by a peer. Wounded and betrayed professionally by a peer who stole the patent on something, and it messed with him. And instead of still going to work and dealing with this, he chose to live on the street and drink himself into a stupor day after day after day. And he would have a conversation, but he didn't want nothing to do with Jesus. He didn't want to know anything about love. He didn't want to know anything about forgiveness. He wanted booze, and he wanted to drink, and he wanted you to feed him, and he wanted to drink again. And that was his life. Multi-millionaire at one point. Had made enough money that his houses were paid for and his family was set up. He's mid-50s and living on the street in downtown Atlanta by choice to drown his pain. Why? Because I was hurt. Somebody did me wrong. Somebody stole from me. Somebody lied to me. Somebody betrayed me. He did that to silence the pain. Lives that once trusted now burned with the acid of revenge. Do you ever get the feeling? I want to, and forgive me if you guys have ever done this. I remember a few months ago when it was on one of the news channels. I think it was Fox News. That's the one I tend to watch the most. And there was some protest going on somewhere up in the Northeast. And there was a guy interviewing them, asking them some legitimate questions, but they didn't like his tone, and they jumped on him and beat him up. They beat up a reporter for Fox News. But you didn't hear about it on any other news channels except Fox News. And these were very left-leaning individuals, union employees way up in the Northeast pleading for this right and that right and all kind of stuff. Do you ever wonder if protest march and those kind of people that picket, if that's just really an outlet for bitter people? I'm just curious. Just a legalized way to get out and vent. Because if you and I understand to have convictions to stand up for something, and if there's anything that ever happens here that we need to exercise our political rights to speak out against or whatever, I expect us to do that. But there's some people that just complain. There's some people that just go to a certain place and they want to vent and they want to be mad about something and they want to yell at somebody and complain about something. Our society is full of those kind of people. But I believe we still got to love them. I believe we still got to reach out to them. I believe that God still wants that person to know him. Amen? So how do you love somebody that doesn't want to be loved? How do you forgive somebody that doesn't want to be forgiven? This guy that chose to live out in the street, he wanted nothing to do with forgiveness or Jesus or anything. How do you reach somebody like that? I don't have the answer. I'm throwing that out there to you. In the face of all this, in the face of the hurt that's been done to us, in the face of the mistreatment, the abuse, and I don't know what your childhood, your teenage years, your home life was growing up. In the face of all that, God commands you to forgive. Okay? And that's where we're going tonight. How to forgive family. And I feel your thoughts. Some of you are like, forgive? Are you kidding? You don't know my parents? Why in the world would I be able to do that? You don't know my kids. You want me to forgive them? You have no idea. You haven't been through what I've been through. And there's some of you that are feeling everything I'm saying. You know this pain. You know the mistreatment that can happen in some homes. But God knows everything that went on in your home. And God commands you to forgive still. And even though there's a command to forgive, this is probably the law in the Bible that we ignore the most. And we carry around grudges and we carry around resentment. And maybe it's not life-altering struggles that you've had since your childhood when you were abused at home. Maybe it's something that's happened at work. Maybe you were mistreated. Maybe you were overlooked for a promotion. Maybe you lost your job and it still has not made sense to you. But there's never anything in the Bible that says it's supposed to make sense. There's never anything in the Bible that says you're going to be treated fairly in this world. This is a sinful world. We know justice is going to come. We know ultimately where we're going to end up if we do forgive. But how many people allow bitterness and misunderstanding and things just not making sense? How many people allow that to drag them away from God and ultimately to hell? Because bitterness dead ends in one place, and that's hell. And you're either going to let it rule you or you're going to let it go. Forgive. If you don't do what God says, bitterness will destroy you. Being hurt is their fault. It's the fault of the people that did that to you. Being hurt is their fault, but being bitter is yours, and you must change. Because staying bitter will turn you into the people that you do not want to be like, the people that you despise the most. Amen? So I want to give you a few practical things, and then we're going to read a scripture in just a few minutes, and we're going to pray. But these are just a few things that the Lord put on my heart to share with you tonight. These are practical things. So how do you break free from the carousel of sickness and pain and bitterness? It's going to be hard, but you can do it because you choose to, and God will strengthen you. So if you're taking notes, hey, and if this makes sense to you, or you got somebody that you know you need to reteach this to, there are 7 steps, and I'm going to fly through these. 7 steps that over my reading, and I'm telling you, I've read several books and even went through an old notebook that I got in Bible college that talked about how to deal with depression, how to deal with bitterness, and hurt young people and hurt adults. Because you know what hurt teenagers grow up into be? They grow up to be bitter adults. That's what happens. But even healthy people can become bitter adults, can't they? Even happy people can become bitter adults. And I go back to Mr. Bick, man. He was such a beautiful home, and it was so warm. It was so good housekeeping inside. It smelled great. I remember it had like the mulberry fragrances going on or something. You know, the candles or the little plug-ins, whatever it was. This was back in the 80s, and I can just remember doilies everywhere and way more window treatments going on than needed to happen. Hardly any light getting in. And he kept his yard perfect. Everything was perfect. It was clean, ready for a mess to happen, ready for life, and there was no life, just pain. When did it happen? Whereas kids, teenagers that just weren't willing to come under correction and chose sin and chose rebellion. They were Christians. Mr. Bick was a Seventh-day Adventist. Good, godly people. Actually, a retired minister. Good, godly people. Just went to church on Saturday. But Christians. Love the Lord. I mean, very conservative folk. Good people. When did it happen in their lives that turned him into the miser that we all summed him up to be, when really there was softness behind the exterior if you could get to it? But here's just a few things. Number one, and I'm going to move through these because this may not apply to all of you, but there's enough in this that I think it'll be a blessing to everyone. Number one, make a list of all those who have hurt you. That's your first step. Make a list of everybody that's hurt you. And I think every one of us, even if we don't have a deep-seated pain that we've carried for years, every one of us could make a list like this if we took time. And trust me, it won't be hard. Your memory is going to click in. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. 8th grade. Oh, when I was 5 years old, that means, I didn't get a sucker at the bank drive-through that one time. No, we don't want to be petty. We're talking about serious issues here. Make a list of all that have hurt you. Take time and leave plenty of space under each name. And if you're doing this, make that list and you can go back and make your true process document at home, but it won't be hard to remember. Number 2, under each name, list all the wrong that person did to you. Deal with it. Let it all hang out. This is a time for confession between you and God, and you deal with your issues. You get it out. If you don't want to be free, then don't get it all out. If you want to keep carrying some of this stuff with you, then don't get it all out. And you might be in your, well, surely he's not talking to me. It's just This is for somebody, but I'm just tolerating it. It might be more for you than you know. Get all of it out, the big, the little, sum it up if you have to. It shouldn't be hard. You've been carrying around some of this stuff for years. Let it all hang out. And some of you have actually begun to enjoy being hurt. You've begun to enjoy the pity. It's become a condition for you. It's become a comfort for you, being bitter, being upset. It's kind of like having a little bit of a pain in your tooth, and it gets so aggravating, sometimes you just bite down hard and allow the overwhelming pain to quiet the smaller pain. And that's kind of how this is for you. Specifically, and the Lord kept bringing me back to this, and really this was the biggest issue. I know that different family members can hurt you, but almost everything I read had to do with parents and kids. What my parents did to me or what my kids did to us. That was the overwhelming battle being fought in so much of what we read. And that may very well be the battle that you're fighting in life between you and your loved one. So I hope you're processing this. Write it all down. And I understand there are specifics that we don't understand. But if it was your parents, it may be that you considered them hypocrites because they did something but said, don't do what I do, do what I say. And you dealt with that. Be specific with those kind of things. If it was your kids, be specific about the rebellion, the attitudes, the words, the attacks, the betrayal, the lies that offended you. You got to deal with these things, because if you don't deal with something, the enemy's going to find it later, and he's going to begin to push on it and squeeze on it and bring infection back and bring bitterness back. When you thought you were healed, all of a sudden something else comes back because you didn't deal with it. We got to get all this stuff out. 1, make a list. 2, write down what they've all done. Number 3, now make another list about all the things you did to hurt them. Wait a minute. That don't seem fair. It's absolutely fair. Make a list of all the things you did to hurt them. Your normally excellent memory may begin to fail you right about now. Ask God to run his plow through your heart and begin to stir these things up. How many lies have you told yourself because of your hurt? What have you justified? What absolutely ridiculous things have you allowed yourself to do just to get back at people? Now, I know swinging a baseball bat at my son is dumb. I get that, and I apologize. I have confessed. Carson, you forgive me? Please? Okay, he forgives me. We're good. But do you know that hurt and bitterness will allow you to justify things that you would never do under normal circumstances? I know people that out of bitterness and out of hurt go and commit adultery to get back at their spouse. I know out of bitterness and hurt people that steal from their spouse in the name of revenge. People that go and waste money and blow money on this or that to get back. Yeah. That lie, that cheat, that cause damage to things, that break things, that set houses on fire. Oh yeah, it happens to get back at people. I hope that's not you. But what have you allowed yourself to justify because of pain and bitterness that have been done to you in your life? Because there's a world around us that justifies all kind of things. How many others have you hurt because someone hurt you? Write it all down. Be honest. Put down all you have done to hurt your family. You may see a lot of stuff on the list that you've done that matches up with the stuff that's been done to you. Now, I pray this is timely for some of you in this place. Let me move on. Number 4, you knew this was coming. Get on your knees and ask God to show you how much what you've done has hurt him. As much as you think you've been hurt, as much as you think you've been mistreated, as much as you think you've been wounded, do you realize that God feels everything 100 more times than you do? Way more, because he loves way more than you. And so the hurt and the pain are felt way more by his perfect, loving, unconditional heart. Do you realize that he allows his Holy Spirit to be subjected to sin because he loves it? He loves you so much. He's put his Spirit in you, and you drag his Spirit through your rebellion, through your sin, through your perversion, and you think he doesn't feel anything? You're kidding yourself. We betray and we stab and abuse the presence of the Lord on a regular basis by dragging him through our bitterness. We have to see what we've done to his perfect heart. We have to see what bitterness does to him. We have to feel every hurt as he's felt every hurt. Some of you have been there spiritually. Some of you have dealt with bitterness and rebellion before. And it happens when you get to a place of brokenness in your life where you will weep before the Lord. And when you begin to weep before the Lord in a way that he allows you to feel his hurt, you can't stop weeping. You may weep for hours. You may be in a perpetual state of weeping for days. That's happened to me before. When God exposes the gravity of my sin in his eyes, what my sin and ugliness and perversion look like in his eyes, my goodness. To feel the pain that he feels, to feel the brokenness that he feels. But we live in this bliss that, oh, it's not that bad, and everybody else is doing it, and we justify. But he's not measuring you by everybody else's standards. He's measuring you by his, and what he's called you to do, and who he's called you to be. And he's not going to stand, you're not going to stand before him one day, well, you know, you were better than her, so come on. He's not going to do that. You either honored him or you didn't. And he's either going to say one of two things. Well done, or I never knew you. So does the way you live show that you are proud to know him and that you honor him? Or are you going to get a I never knew you? Easy, Pastor. Don't get so rough. The pain you feel in your deepest hurt is only a fraction of what God has felt for you. You are not meant to carry these burdens, but yet you do. You are not meant to go through life carrying the weights of these offenses, this brokenness, this abuse. You're not meant to. Jesus is the only person that can carry those burdens and survive. If you try to go through life processing and carrying the burdens, the abuse, the infection that's been planted in you through mistreatment, it will kill you, it will destroy you, and it will drag you to hell. You are not meant, you were never intended to carry those kind of burdens. That's why Jesus carried them all. They will destroy you. And some of you know what I'm talking about. He can free you, but freedom is impossible if you are not willing to let go. Listen, I know that I don't understand this to the level that many of you guys do, but I have my fair share. And I understand it's hard to let go. It kind of becomes an identity. The abuse, the pain that you carry around, it becomes a little bit of an identity, and it becomes a part of you. And when somebody begins to preach or talk about forgiving those that have hurt you, you almost begin to just say, yeah, whatever. Because they obviously don't know it, but God knows what's been done to you, and he's still saying forgive. And he knows how many years you've carried this. He knows the hurt that you carry, the tears that you still shed when you hear certain names, when you go to certain places, the searing pain of regret and bitterness and hatred that comes over you. He sees it and he feels it, and he's still saying forgive. Why? Because he wants you to make it to heaven. And if you can't forgive, then you can't be forgiven. I know it seems tough. It seems impossible. Oh, it's easy to talk about, but hard to do. I get that. Maybe it's time that some of you cried. Maybe it's time some of you got alone and really begin to make these lists and look at some of the names and go back through some of those situations that you have buried. Maybe it's time some of you let it out emotionally and you begin to weep before the Lord and let him begin to heal you. Because I'm telling you, his love can melt away the years of hurt, of anger. I want you to bow your heads right now.